The American Adoption Congress, 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991, in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape 20.
Okay. Welcome to Dealing with the Media. And I'm AAC Communications Director, and I do most of the dealing with the media for the AAC, and I have done it for a couple of years. My background is in journalism. I've been a professional writer, reporter, and editor for a number of years in Washington, D.C. with various newspapers and wire services in that area. And I currently work for a law firm as a marketing director. I made a switch a while ago, and it's something that's an interesting career change, at least. I'm an adoptee. I've reunited for almost 10 years now, and I am also an adoptive parent of 2 kids through an open adoption. And I have pictures that I was showing Grace. Anybody else wants to see, that's fine. And like I said, if we could go around, just introduce yourselves, say what you want to get. I want to have this as a discussion, an exchange of ideas. I have a number of suggestions. I have some sample press releases and things we can talk about. But I'd like it to be a discussion, not just a presentation, because I'm a little uncomfortable with that. Just introduce yourselves.
My name is James Timmons. I'm with a private, nonprofit, licensed agency in the state of Texas. Great state of Texas.
All Texans say that.
They all do.
I'm a misplaced Texas. Anyway, I come with some rather negative feelings.
Mm-hmm.
My agency has been the target of a number of unfavorable press releases. I really rail against this. I feel it's unfair.
Coming from the source of those unfavorable comments.
The reporters will come in, they're real nice people. We like to tell the story of adoption. We like to let the people know and so forth. We treat them with utmost respect, honest, forthright, give them everything they ever wanted to know, and then we sit back and we wait for the smear to happen. And it does. And the articles are written, with a lot of smoke but no fire. And the other thing that I have to say here is it's a fact that while we are all in the community of adoptions, we are, in a sense, competitors in this day and age. And what always amazes me is our colleagues, our competitors, they are most quick to join the pack. They smell blood, or they think they smell blood, and they're always quoted. And the reporters will do that. They'll come and interview you, then they'll go out and interview 3 other people who are your competitors, your colleagues, your professional colleagues, who will make quotes that are inaccurate, downright false, which gives them more smoke to generate.
So you have concerns with your agency's perception in the media and the public perception because of negative media coverage, and just in a nutshell.
Well, not exactly. My concerns are that the media is most unfair by what they focus on. They don't tell the whole story. They're not honest and forthright. They've got other agendas. And these agendas are based upon misconceptions on their own part. The journalists don't do their homework in terms of trying to understand what adoption is all about.
Okay.
They're looking for sensationalism. That's apparently what sells magazines. Baby selling, baby buying, that's always a good one. Now, the other side of my concerns are that we, as in the field, shoot ourselves in the foot.
Exactly.
And if we're ever going to turn some of these things around, then we've got to face what it is we're not doing right and what it is we really should be doing. And part of that is that we've got to have some kind of a unification. We've got to have some kind of solidarity and mutual support.
Well said.
I'm hoping that I really assume that what I've said will be really the focus of our discussion.
Okay. Carol? You want to try to follow that?
I was afraid you were going to do that, Robin. Logically, she's going to go around this way, but I know she's going to do this.
Got it.
Okay. I don't know if you were going to address anything about newsletters for
Okay.
these groups. That's one of the things I'd like to do.
Okay.
Because we do have a newsletter, and we're not taking advantage of what we need to be doing.
Okay. You want to introduce yourself and say where you're from?
I'm
And yeah,
sorry.
that's
I'm Carol Vandenfoss from Seattle, Washington, Warren. The other thing is that we have a couple of for-profit agencies in the state of Washington, and they are advertising everywhere. They've come in and, give
the
away
billboards
free-
and
The billboards, the buses, they're going into the
Mhm.
schools, all that sort of thing, and people aren't aware of what's happening. And to prospective birth mothers, this may sound like a really good idea. You can go there and place your baby. They make it wonderful for prospective birth mothers to be put up in a really good place and, have all kinds of things. And then it's only afterward that they realize what they've done, and their baby by that time will be clear across the country and clear in another country.
And open
And-
adoption.
And it's open adoption, right, however.
yeah, right. Fat chance.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we just need to know what to do to go to the media with that kind of thing and expose what's really happening in those
Sure.
agencies.
Okay. Introduce yourselves. Yeah.
I don't,
Either one. Go ahead.
Okay.
Either one.
I'm Cindy Gum. I'm from Montecito. No one knows who that is. It's near San Jose, Northern California. And I'm here strictly as a very naive observer, but the reason I'm in this workshop is because I recently, which is very recently, really within the last month, had a real Cinderella kind of a reunion with finding both my mother and my father married to one another with 6 siblings, and have had this miracle reunion, and I think it's a good story. I also write, and I'd like to write about it, and I'm wondering, about the media. But
Okay.
I'd like to use the story, if it's a good story, to help create awareness for what, adoption.
That's a big point that I always try to cover in any workshop like this, is that the backlash from the positive Cinderella story that we have to deal with. And that is the public perception. They may read a wonderfully nice, warm story about your reunion, and it's well written and it's nice, and it just makes everybody get teary-eyed and goosebumped. And the problem is that what that creates, in addition to the teary eyes and goosebumps, is the perception that, hey, this person beat the odds. These people can find if they want to. Why should we bother opening the records?
Right. Well, am I naive to think that maybe this could be a...
No, there are ways to twist it. There are ways to twist it. And that's what we have been working very hard to do in the last year. Shoot, I should have brought them there. Last year in Chicago, we facilitated a reunion at the conference. And it was a woman from up in San Jose who had been separated from her 5 or 6 brothers and sisters more than 40 years ago when the family was split up. Now, she was the only one who was formally adopted. The others managed to hang on and stay together. And we managed to, we found them. They lived in Chicago. She'd been born there, so we facilitated this reunion. Of course, we had the press running around like crazy. And it was on all the TV stations. The Tribune and the Sun-Times were there. And my favorite headline of anything I have ever worked on for AAC came out as a result of that. Sealed records delay reunion by 40 years.
This is kind of what I'm...
That's what you want to do.
We can make this
Yes.
positive for the movement. And
Right.
It's all so new and so fresh.
Mhm.
And, I'd love to have it be a vehicle for that kind of change rather than just a Cinderella story.
Sure. Okay. Good.
My name is Jim Gamboni. I'm from the Search Institute in Minneapolis, and I wear a couple of hats here. One is I'm a television and film producer and a former investigative reporter, so I'm a person that's been on that side. That's not why I'm here.
Oh, you're one of the slimes, yeah.
But right now I'm working as a consultant to Search Institute, and they were just funded to do the nation's first and largest study on adopted adolescents by the National Institute of Mental Health. So I'm trying to figure out right now, having played on one side and having done PR, to try to figure out how we can make this information that's going to come out of this study, this 4-year study, make this most widely available, and to learn from people like yourselves, because I'm not really an expert or
Well,
expert.
you guys have a good start, because I got a news press release information for the conference with, 20 pages of contacts, so you're doing a good job of it already. But anything that you feel free to add as well from our discussion in this, because it's always helpful to have more than one source of information.
But I'm also interested as an independent film and television
Sure.
producer I'm moved by a lot of the stories that I've heard being connected with this field over the last year, plus being here, and I would like to figure out how to help tell those stories too,
Sure.
as a professional producer.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I'm Leslie Clark with Texas Association of Licensed Children's Services, and I'm director of this association, which has adoption agencies and children's homes and residential treatment centers, and it's a fairly new job for me. I've been in it less than 6 months, and I have already dealt with the media a couple of times and reporters, and I do a lot of legislative work, and so I'm here a lot for my own education about how to do that, and then also just because I see Texas as having a huge need for more public awareness about adoption.
And you want to see how you can project yourself and your agency, your affiliation, a little bit more strongly and favorably in the media.
Right.
Okay.
Jill Henricks, I'm a social worker for Lutheran Social Services in Chicago. I came because we're just not doing anything news-wise, and yet we have a really terrific program. We're doing the most open adoptions in the Chicago area and doing a lot with birth fathers, but nobody knows, well, just hearsay, not through the media. Basics, who to contact, how to get.
Okay. I talked to a Chicago Trib reporter yesterday who's working on a story on open adoption. I wish I'd known you were here, but I will get you her name and numbers, and that might be an immediate contact. I know they were running a short piece over the weekend, but she was looking at doing something in greater depth, and yeah, so we'll get into some of that, who to contact, how to contact. Delane?
Yeah, back here, I'm Delane Curtis, and I've worked in the adoption movement for about 9 years, so just my own contacts with the media, I like to see what other people do, and how to do that.
Okay.
I'm Michelle Borsoff. I'm with Missing Pieces in Springfield, Illinois, and our local paper is going to be following me around on my search. And,
Oh, isn't that an interesting way of doing it? Okay.
and I'm kind of interested in the pitfalls of what might happen in the process and what to look out for and how to deal with them.
Okay.
I'm Maggie Ruby and Michelle and our co-group leaders with our group in Springfield, Illinois. And myself also for the same reasons as Michelle just mentioned. Of all parts of my support group, this makes me the most nervous in dealing with the media, which is strange because I have a minor in journalism. I worked on the college paper and have a little bit of dabbling in journalism, and yet I'm extremely nervous how to deal with them. And by talking to other groups, knowing full well that you could slit your own throat and not realize it, and I don't want to do that. I want to promote a positive image for our group as well.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, I'm Bill Walsh, and I belong with my wife to a support group in Topeka. And we talked last night, I'm one of the 200 who grabs your little piece of bread that's left, it's not gone. But,
It got further gone later, too, believe me.
Sharon, get all that? Well, Sharon came out to one of our conferences about 2 years ago, and it was done in Topeka. And we live just outside of Kansas City, and we're moving it to the Kansas City market for September of this year. And I really don't think that any work had been done with the media in terms of exposure or arrangement. And I guess that's what I'd like to take back some tips to say, okay, yeah, how do we get TV9 there? How do we get the Star there? What are some things that we can do to increase exposure, increase awareness, which is the only place to start, only way we can start.
Okay.
I'm Bob Duncan. I belong to Cub in San Diego. I just recently completed my own search on adoptee, and so it's time to stay in the movement, move on to reform. I'm a member of the board, and I would like to contribute positively, so I too want to make sure that we're strategically going along, saying the right things, and contributing here in California.
Okay.
I'm Susan Westrom. I'm from Sacramento, California, the great state of California. And I work with an organization that provides educational and support services to women in unplanned pregnancies and their important others, families, birth father, etc. I think my main goal for this particular session is to learn, again, like so many have expressed, how to get positive results from media exposure. We've had a real abuse of adoption, a real abuse of baby finders within our area, and adoption's a real negative thing in the Sacramento area. And what we provide is not baby finding services. So I think we're just real interested in improving public image.
Okay.
My name is Barbara Shaw. I'm a birth mother, and I belong to San Diego Cub. And I have a background in newspaper writing and also TV production. And I kind of just took this upon myself, but I started monitoring the media, taping every TV show that I could possibly know about. I'm in a position time-wise, because I work as a house mother at Casa Maria, which is a home for single moms, and I have, free time in the day to write. So my interest is not only monitoring the media and finding out what is being said about this issue in the newspapers and on television, but also then giving back, which with board approval. I, for example, wrote a letter to head of the class who did a very lovely show on adoption. And being in Southern California, of course, we're in a unique position because we're right near, Hollywood. And so I'm very, very interested in that and in writing editorials about this issue and making sure that our organization's point of view is put across in a very positive way. And I'm also writing a screenplay.
Okay.
About my experience as a birth mother. But I think mainly is to make sure that Cub is well represented, in the media. And I also arrange for articles. I just arranged for an article to get into the San Diego Union. So I'm kind of, I guess it's both sides.
Right, and you're a little bit of both,
A little bit of both, yeah.
We'll have to talk at some point because I have for years done the monitoring monitoring the media's perception of adoption. I have like this huge collection of videotapes and newspaper articles and stuff that is just outlandish. But I've always said I was going to go back and finish my master's, and that was what I do my thesis on, but it hasn't gone beyond my briefcase and file drawer yet. But it's a very fascinating topic for a media junkie. Yeah. Marty?
My name is Marty Smith. I'm also a birth mother and a member of Cub. And in the last 6 or 7 months, I found myself speaking out a lot, even before I know I did it. And I want to make sure that I learn what not to say, because I feel like it's just so important not to do anything to damage us in our quest to be heard. And I know we're real fragile, and we're really held out a lot just to see what we can do. And the reason that I want to learn that, and I also am real interested in how the media can turn something around, because about several months ago there was something that moved me greatly on television. ABC covered something which was an abandonment, as they said. It was an abandonment of an 18-month-old thereabouts on a doorstep, and was found early in the day, and there was a big media blitz with this picture of this child all over, and they found who the child came from. And the film at 11 was the birth mother being carted off into jail with her hands handcuffed behind her, and the news reporter made a comment that hopefully never to see this child again. And then I read that it was not. She put this child in a very populated upper middle class neighborhood, was very clean, had several of her favorite little toys with her. That was not abandonment. That was a woman in trouble.
In a desperate situation.
In a desperate situation. And I thought, we just don't stand a chance here. If the impartial media reporter ends this little story with that, and I just feel lost as to what to do to even have somebody hear that. I called 2 or 3 reporters from the two reporters from the LA Times, one from the Orange County Register the next day. I mean, I was just outraged, and obviously what I said didn't work, because they said, that's very nice, I can understand how you feel that way, and...
Goodbye.
So I don't know what to say, I want to know what to say, and I want to know what not to say.
Okay. Rosemary?
My name's Rosemary Harbison. I'm Australian, and I'm planning to go on radio in Australia next month, so I'm wanting to get some ideas. The laws over there are changing and the records are opening. As of March 1st, the last state in Queensland, they were to open. But a group of adopted parents got together, intimidated the Premier, and put back the laws to June 1st and added a veto system. So I went from expecting my daughter's records to having it taken away, expecting it for a year, and then having it taken away again. So I'm planning to speak on radio and put forward the ideas that there are people out there who do want the open records, and hopefully prevent it from going backwards any further than it already is. And then when I'm done over there and I've settled my issues with my daughter, I'm hoping to devote my life to public speaking, because I think adoption is the greatest human tragedy of the 20th century.
Okay. Yeah, Carol?
Rowan, I remember one thing that I saw in the paper recently. In Missouri, there was a young man who wanted to have his records opened, and he was in the service, and I believe going to Saudi. It was during that time. And he was denied in court, but what they did was publish his date of birth, his picture, and a whole lot of things about him. And I thought, isn't this wonderful? Because even though he was turned down, obviously his birth family is going to see this. I think his birth mother said yes to the contact, and the birth father said no, he wasn't ready for contact. So I think it will probably happen as a result of that. And that was a really positive thing. So how do we do more of that kind of thing?
Well, that, to finish, I said part of the reunion story in Chicago last year. There's another component to it, and that was this adoptee who was being reunited had an adopted sister. They were very close. The sister had been searching for years and was getting nowhere. She knew her birth family name, but she didn't know much more than that. She had a questionable first name for the birth mother. And what we did was make sure she was part of this reunion. So they had her, and she was one of those people who was very attractive, very good looking, and she was very emotional. And it was genuine emotion, so it was very appealing to the media. And so she managed to get on. She was mentioned in both of the news stories in the papers, including her birth date and her birth name in one of them. She was on many of the evening news shows. She was on a radio show. And this happened to be a radio reporter who was very sympathetic to our cause anyway. And this was over Memorial Day weekend. Well, this happened on Thursday. Friday, this reporter aired these stories all day about this reunion, and also his interview with Sandy. Sandy, he went on vacation for the long holiday. Monday, I think, Sunday or Monday, this person was trying desperately to get hold of the radio station, and it was the grandmother. The birth mother had been institutionalized for years. And so once he came into work, I think on Monday morning, he comes racing over trying to catch everybody before they leave for the airport. They wound up having an airport reunion before it happened. And of course, that was a whole nother round of newspaper stories, because we got another round of it. But that was one of the most remarkable ones I've seen. And that was because we managed to get that kind of information. I noticed a couple of years ago where I live, there was a story in the media about a very horrendous murder of a young woman. And it mentioned that she had been adopted in California and gave her birth date. So I clipped it and sent it to somebody on the West Coast and said, just put this in your file, you know, because it saved somebody an awful lot of effort if it had to be. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think that when I talked to the reporter at the San Diego Union, I said, you know, the reunion stories are really wonderful. And you see a lot of that, and it seems like the reporters really love that kind of story. But when it gets to issues, you know, it's like, well, what do you mean adopt? Well, you know, so I find if you give them a couple ideas, they really appreciate it. I said to this particular reporter, I said, why don't you do a story on, this was for Birth Parent Week, why don't you do a story on, there's 5 of us in the community that are working to do something in our community. One is a volunteer with Planned Parenthood. 2 of us work in a residential home for single moms. One is a Big Sister Society, but takes pregnant teens as a big sister. You know, this type of thing. And that's what she did the story on. Instead of kind of talking about our reunions or our non-reunions or whatever. So sometimes I think when you give them some ideas that you can get, the reunion stories are great, we don't want to stop that, but also it shows that we're multidimensional people, that we're kind of out there being intelligent and doing things. And so I thought that, you know, that just as an idea, just to kind of have a list in your mind of kind of angles, because I work for the newspaper and reporters love that.
The first thing I want to say about reporters is not necessarily in defense of them, but reporters are just like you and me. I mean, they are people who are busy, they have very diverse lives. Very few of them, depending upon where they work, are allowed the luxury of having a specialty. So you often wind up with someone who is what's called a general assignment reporter. If you look at the TV news, you generally always see the same guy covering the mayor's office, the same guy covering the state legislature, and perhaps the same woman who's, you know, covering the school system. Then you see sort of this whole row of people who don't have a specialty. They're called general assignment. In the newspaper, the general assignment staff is enormous in a major paper. You cannot expect them to have any understanding of adoption, just as we don't expect the general public who's unaffected by adoption to have a great understanding of the issues related to adoption. So oftentimes we have to start way back at very much square one. Explain to them what an adoption is, that the records are closed and why that came about. Does anybody know why the records were closed, when they were closed, and what the history of that is? Okay. Very briefly, I have with me upstairs in my room, actually I have them here, take them out of here, suggested questions and answers from the AAC, which I encourage any of you to, I'm supposed to have it in here, any of you to get. It is 4 pages, and I've got a few of them in here if you want to take them out, and I'll put them back in with the supply in my room. It's 4 pages of typically asked questions about adoption and sort of the AAC's party line response to it. What is the American Adoption Congress? That's the first one. What is meant by sealed records? What is meant by open records? How many adoptees and birth parents are there? Is there really the demand for open records? Why would someone want to know that information? Couldn't it be harmful, detrimental, or confusing to know? If records are open and information is revealed, what about the adoptee and birth parents who do not wish to be identified or contacted? Isn't this an invasion of their privacy? If records are open and information is real, what about the adoptive parents who have loved and raised their sons and daughters? Isn't this disrespectful of their legal rights and their emotional ties? What if the adoption records contain disturbing and negative news? What if the adoptee or birth parent meets with rejection at the end of his search? How do adoption agencies and institutions feel about open records? Can other mechanisms such as reunion registries achieve the same goal as open records without infringing on anyone else's rights? Can any of you answer those questions? I've got them downstairs near registration. I'll give you a brief nutshell history of confidentiality, and that is that oftentimes I'm asked that question, the records, what about this new system of open adoption or this new system of opening these records? Well, really, closing records is a phenomenon of the 20th century. The records in adoption proceedings and all adoption proceedings were open up until around the turn of the century. Most of the legislation that sealed records was enacted between 1920 and 1940. And what you see is, at this stage of the game, a reaction to our cause, essentially, is a reaction to some laws that have since outplayed their usefulness. The records were sealed back in those days because there is a tremendous stigma against unwed pregnancy. At the same time as that Victorian era morality was still very much in force back in the early 20th century, you had the tail end of the social reform movement, which included the growth of a lot of social service agencies. You had an enormous number of immigrants coming to this country from other countries who many times were victims of the plague or cholera, various illnesses, that left them orphaned instead of with their families. You saw the phenomenon of the orphan train started. All of this at the same time was occurring. And when you look at a situation of an unwed pregnancy, you look at the stigma that couples endured who were infertile, and you looked at these homeless kids who needed help. The agency had a very active role for itself, and the agency's role in adoption grew phenomenally during this time period. You can look on a lot of the old agencies in this country and you'll see exactly those dates when they're founded, 1891, founded, 1918, these kinds of things. Serving young women since 1922, things like that. What happened was, as the agencies came into this, they decided that the need for keeping the information confidential was really an effort to keep the information confidential from public scrutiny. They felt that the child needed to be protected against the label of bastard or illegitimate. The birth mother needed to be protected against wearing that red A for unwed pregnancy. And the adoptive parents needed to have their privacy ensured so that they didn't have to endure public scrutiny as they were raising this, God forbid, bastard child. The times have certainly changed since then. The attitudes have changed since then. And our point is that the laws that govern, the statutes that govern confidentiality of these records have really outlasted their usefulness. Yeah, Delane.
I think too that the agencies that provided a shield for them, they then were not accountable to the people that they served, especially the adoptee and the birth parents.
Of course not.
So they thought, oh great, let's continue this.
I think that came a little bit later. I mean, in all honesty, I think I'm willing to give a lot of the agencies the benefit of the doubt as far as their motives on the outset. The outset of this whole movement starting back in so many years ago. But as they got entrenched, as they got empowered, as they had their little important role in society, they're not going to give it up. And that's what you see with a lot of agencies today that are unwilling to yield in any form consider any form of adoption reform, because they're comfortable with the power they yield, it's working for them, and they're not about to change. Now, that's a brief, history on confidentiality. I use that as an example because that's the kind of information that if you're going to be the subject of an interview, if you're going to be speaking on the subject at all, you need to know this information. And you need to do your homework. And you need to be able to talk intelligently, articulately. Writing and talking are not the same thing by any means, but one of the joys of the English language is there's so many words to it. And part of good articulate talking and good, thorough, comprehensive writing is using a variety of words. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind when you are talking, that there are lots of words for sealed records, confidential, secret, things like this. They all have buzzwords for people. The other thing to think about when you're talking, particularly for the media, is what I call a soundbite. This is, you mentioned Rosemary, you mentioned something about, as it went through, I thought, God, that's a good soundbite. You said something about this is one of the great secrets of the...
Greatest human tragedy.
Right. Okay. Other ones that we did a workshop with the board last night, went around and I made all of them go around and think of one, Somebody had the darkness of sealed records.
Legalized baby stealing.
That one's an inflammatory. And that's, that one is, that represents an opinion in there. And not that all of them don't, but that one's an inflammatory. That's beyond a soundbite. Now that is something they'll pick up immediately. The media will. The darkness of sealed records, what are some of the other ones we've come up with? Of course, the chains that bind us from knowing this information. All these kinds of metaphors that you can think of, that those are the kinds of things that people love, the reporters, the broadcasters love to hear about. So if you're doing anything like that, sit down and think about some of this. Think about the things that you need to know. Okay, let's look at a couple of things here. First off, I've kind of wrote down the various issues we want to cover. First off, I'm going to jump around in the priority I take these. Public image. Some concerns about presenting yourself in the public, articulately what you say. That's kind of come from several people here. This is a book I'm going to refer to, and I'm going to really encourage anybody to spring for it. And I'll be glad to pass it around. No, it's not. It's called Getting Publicity, and the author is a woman named Tana Fletcher. And it's published by Self Counsel, C-O-U-N-S-E-L, Business Press, Business Series. And it's in, was it Bellingham, Washington? Somewhere. Tana Fletcher. I'll pass it around for you. It was published in Canada, but yeah, Bellingham, Washington is where you can get it from. It's $13. And Marty, if would you start that for me? Yeah, actually it is. I put it in the syllabus because I'm so impressed with it. It's an excellent book for any organization. It's specifically for nonprofit organizations on a shoestring budget. And assuming you can spring for the $13 to buy it, it goes from setting a publicity and press relations strategy, how to implement that strategy, how to evaluate its effectiveness, and how to recharge and go on from that.
And this is not just for adoption?
No, no, this is in general. In fact, the examples she uses have nothing to do with adoption. But it is an excellent book, and some of the public image, how to present yourself, questions that she deals with in there are excellent, some of her discussion. Some of the things that you might want to keep in mind when you are presenting a public image, whether it's with the media or a legislature or something like that, are things about, first off, your appearance, how you look, how you dress. Dress strongly so that you appear to be, whether you are or not, in a position of strength, whether you are comfortable with your issue. If you are comfortable wearing strong colors, if you're more comfortable with pastel colors, those in your body language all have a message that they send. This is really ridiculous, but watch your hair. People's hair, and I'm one of the worst offenders of this because I hate my hair. People's hair. I have a very good friend who does a lot of interviews at AAC, and she has bangs that are down to here, and she always is kind of pushing them up. I said, every time you're on television, cut your bangs before you go on, because everybody's going to sit there and say, how does she keep that hair out of her eyes? And they're not listening to what she has to say, and it's still long. She doesn't listen to me, but it's still long, and it's one of those minor things that, don't wear the flamboyant earrings when you're on a publication, or not a television program, any kind of broadcasting. Last night we did a photo session for all the AAC board members, and one of our board members, who's one of the artists in the art exhibit, had this great pair of earrings on that were bunches of grapes. They were wonderful. I loved them. I'd love to have them myself. I said, take them off. We're doing pictures to accompany press releases. Do you think somebody's going to look at that and say, look, she got grapes hanging out of her ears? They're going to they're not taking you seriously. They're a lot of fun. They're wonderful things to do, but watch it. If you are going to be on TV, there are all kinds of rules about dress, and don't wear plaids, don't wear white, put on more makeup. If you're a gentleman, by all means add a little powder so that you don't have that shine. If you have an expanding forehead, and I'm not mentioning any names anywhere, be sure you powder it, because the light from the TV camera can glisten right off of it, believe it or not, and look absolutely ridiculous. Watch your glasses. If you've got those kinds of glasses, that turn dark in the sunlight. I have a good friend who is public information officer for the my local school system. And I looked on the news one night, and he's talking about something. He's got the shades on because his glasses had turned dark in the bright sunlight. And I called him up and said, get rid of your shades. You look like a sleazeball. You're hiding something. That stuff conveys stuff. Part of our whole movement is about openness and honesty. So I'm very careful when I'm talking with people and encouraging them to come forward with stories and make these contacts, to tell them how to do that so that they present themselves as well as they can. That's just a few things to keep in mind. Err on the conservative side. you know, whatever your appearance and so forth is, and not all of us can change our appearance dramatically, but just err on the conservative side if you have to. Because most of the people are going to be conservative in nature that you're going to be dealing with, believe it or not. And that's one thing that you want to not offend them and offend their sensibilities, or they give you less credibility. Can anybody add anything to public image types of things that we want to? Yeah.
You have to be careful about socks.
Yes, men have to be careful about socks. As soon as you cross your legs, that nice little bit of calf shows. And there is a real strong piece of advice: men should always wear knee socks of the same color as their trousers, so that you don't have little flesh showing.
And then also, just again, a lot of us are aware of it, but you don't think about it until after you've heard yourself. That once you start speaking in public, you'll speed up by about 25%. So I mean, it's something to keep a conscious thought in your
Yes, and also many people, I'm one of them myself, I have to watch myself, because as soon as I start talking and I hear myself, the pitch of what I hear off of that tape is much higher than what I hear coming out of my mouth right now. And it's very interesting because I have to watch it when I'm doing like a radio show or something, that I keep my voice down, that I don't kind of let it get up to the pitch that I might normally, you know. You can do that. You can modulate your voice, and I have to do that.
Okay, a question. If doing a television interview, now again, looking more from a reporter coming to a conference, do you look at the camera? Do you look at the person?
Look where they tell you to look.
Okay, they'll tell you.
If they will usually tell you, or say, look, where do you want me to look, there or here? And depending upon what they're doing, they'll probably tell you to look at them, because usually they're doing that stand-up short thing. If they're doing an extended interview, they may have you look at the camera directly. And one of the theater tricks that people use is, if you know you're going to be interviewed and you want to prepare for it, do sit very comfortably in front of a door and use your doorknob. The doorknob is about the same size as the lens on a TV camera. And you look at it and you kind of focus your attention on it, and you'll get used to talking to it. Believe it or not, walk.
This is the end of side A. Please turn your tape over and continue on side B.